I wanted to preach a nice, comfortable sermon about fluffy chic today.
Because, well, that's what today's lessons were about.
But then, 1 Peter made me groan out loud. If you have ever felt like a Bible verse was being used as a weapon against you, or just used to justify why you should stay in a place of pain, this sermon is for you. Usually Good Shepherd Sunday is full of images like Jesus with a lamb slung over his shoulders like a stole. But this week, the lectionary gets weird. Jesus starts calling himself a gate. And then Peter tells us that enduring pain while suffering unjustly has God's approval. For centuries, that specific sentence has been abused to keep women in domestic violence and to tell the marginalized to just take it. It's a text that makes me want to close the book. But bear with me, because when we dig into these words, we find a message of resistance that is better than anything I hoped we might find. We started 1 Peter at verse 19 in our reading today, and verse 18 is even worse. Slaves, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only those who are good and gentle, but also those who are dishonest. And we need this context to see that this whole passage was addressed to slaves in ancient Roman households. It's not a general treatise on suffering. It had a very specific audience. In ancient Rome, there were behavioral codes written to tell people how to act, like old school Miss Manners. These behavioral codes explicitly defined the rigid social hierarchy of the Roman Empire. And staying within your inherited social status was strictly required. Defying it in any way threatened the state, because the Roman household was considered to be a microcosm of the empire. It was ruled by the patriarch, who held absolute legal authority over his family, his servants, and slaves. A casual read of 1 Peter seems to be reinforcing this hierarchy, but actually, he is completely undermining it. He uses the Greek word despotes for the owners of the Christian slaves, which is where we get, you guessed it,
The word despot.
that's the one, the word despot. And he only uses the word Lord for God, not for those earthly masters, demoting them from their divine-like authority with grammar. Those two words dismantle the whole hierarchical system of Rome and assure these people trapped in slavery that their human masters do not hold ultimate authority over their lives. Just as Jesus absorbed unjust suffering without retaliating, Peter says that the enslaved Christians are submitting physically, but they're refusing to surrender psychological control. The message that they hold in their heart is, you may control my body,
but you ain't gonna control my mind.
but you do not own my soul. He is empowering them with the foundation of the practice of nonviolence, rooted in Christ, who, when abused and tormented, refused to return the abuse. In the same way, Christians can break the cycle of violence by absorbing unjust suffering without reflecting it back in a powerful act of resisting oppression. This is not a passage that encourages suffering for suffering's sake, or to remain in an abusive situation. But for people who are unable to escape their circumstances, it's a profoundly empowering message, taken to heart by great civil rights leaders like Dr. King and Howard Thurman. But before them, this passage was dangerously taken out of context and used to justify the institution of slavery in this country. And yet somehow, African Americans survived having the Bible used as a tool of their subjugation. Thankfully, enslaved people in America did not simply accept that those weaponized verses had the meaning they were taught. They looked past the literal words of 1 Peter to focus on the whole liberating message of the Bible. The overarching story of the Exodus and the unjust crucifixion of Jesus, who triumphed over death and his oppressors. They trusted God's ultimate story of divine love and freedom, knowing that any individual verse wielded to diminish human dignity is a corruption of the text. The story is love. Full stop. And their trust in that story teaches us how to read the Bible. Now let's talk about the Good Shepherd. First, let's get a picture in our head of the sheepfold. It's not a fenced-in grassy area, but a heavy stone enclosure attached to a house. And to keep predators from jumping over the sides, the walls are topped with spiky, thorny branches, ancient barbed wire. There is only one way in or out: the gate. In the first century Middle East, shepherds led from the front, calling out, and the sheep followed because they recognized the shepherd's voice, their own shepherd. Just as the enslaved African Americans knew the voice of true divine love and liberation that lay beneath the misuse of the 1 Peter text, the shepherd knew the sheep by name. Just as when the risen Jesus says Mary's name on Easter morning, she finally recognizes he's not the gardener. By calling himself the Good Shepherd, Jesus is saying that he leads by invitation and caring, personal relationship, contrasting himself with the bad shepherds. He's hearkening back to the Hebrew metaphor of a king as a shepherd and making a commentary about who was using political power and leading unethically, ruling for their own gain, instead of taking care of the sheep. By calling himself the gate, he protects the vulnerable flock from thieves and bandits. But the gate cannot stay closed, or the sheep will starve. Jesus protects, but also provides abundant life, allowing the sheep to come in and go out to find pasture. In our divisive times, it's very tempting to want to close off gates, to keep certain people out, to want to feel safe, surrounded by like-minded people. But that liberating love at the heart of the biblical story requires an open gate. About a month ago, Sarah Mullally, the first female Archbishop of Canterbury, was enthroned. She walked from London to Canterbury on a 6-day pilgrimage. Along the way, she carried her crozier, a shepherd's crook, symbolizing her role as a shepherd of the people of God. She has inherited a global church deeply divided over LGBTQ plus equality and the ordination of women. And the dividing line splits the global north and south, with Anglican churches in places that England had colonized, like a bad shepherd, opposing the liberating changes that churches in the north have made. Mullally has acknowledged the distress and pain caused by these long-standing debates and hopes that her leadership will allow. Let me say that again. Mullally has acknowledged the distress and pain caused by these long-standing debates. And she hopes that her leadership will allow for mutual flourishing. In the face of criticism and rejection from leaders of the Anglican churches in the global south, she graciously said, "I have always known there would be people opposed to me in this role. But what I hope to be able to offer is hospitality, to listen to their concerns, and for us to be able to find partnership together in that way." In this book that we read from every Sunday, the story is love, full stop. From that story, we learn the radical practice of nonviolence and the importance of keeping the gate open so that all who desire may find their way into the fold of that loving shepherd. Because of his example, it's possible to absorb violence without reflecting it back. It's possible to make peace. Archbishop Mullally shows us that we can walk into a maelstrom of rejection with a peaceful heart. She didn't strike back, she offered hospitality. That is our call here at Holy Family. An open gate does not make us vulnerable. It is the ultimate act of nonviolent resistance. It is saying to the world, we stand for love, and we will not close our hearts to anyone. We keep the gate open for LGBTQ plus folks looking for a spiritual home, for a neighbor looking for community, and even for the critic who isn't sure they belong here. We keep it open because we know the shepherd's voice, and his voice always sounds like an invitation to come into the sheepfold and experience God's liberating love.